as I was saying, you can also interact with the browser by directly manipulating the document object model through a reference to that hierarchical object that we saw on the browser through the document object. And it has all sorts of functions that allow you to add content, remove content, manipulate what's already there, and traverse the tree, right, from the root. The document represents the root of this document, and then you can traverse it, from node to node to node, following all the children, the branches, and then manipulating all these different content. So we'll see examples of this. You can also not only write and manipulate the content and add content to the tree. You can also read from it. Right? It says and search content that is already there. For instance, we just wrote content to it, right? Like hello world. Here's interpreted as just a plain old string, but you can also add fully formatted HTML documents, HTML strings, right? Not that you would do this, but you can, right? You can also read from content that's already there, and say, well, search for me, start at the root of the document and traverse the tree looking for nodes in the tree that have a specific a pattern, right? You can retrieve elements that might have a unique identifier, the ID, right? And it can retrieve for you, and then you can then manipulate it. You can say, well, replace any content that content had, any HTML that it had, replace it with this text instead. So, for instance, if you consider this HTML piece, hello world, right? We can search the root from the root of the document and retrieve it and replace the content. So for instance, here if we have indeed this h1 and we retrieve it, we can assign it to a local variable inside of the script tag. And once we have it, we can then reference it, and it has all sorts of attributes that allow you to manipulate the style, like the font, the front color, the background color, the borders around it, the margins, the padding. So there's everything that we saw that you can do in CSS. There is an object equivalent to this. Okay, this is very low level, and we'll never actually do something like this. Right. Nevertheless, I wanted to just point out that there is this low level way of interacting with the DOM directly. Right. As we'll soon see, we won't be using this low level interaction. Instead, we will be using libraries such as jQuery. And soon after, we'll say, well, jQuery is also very low level, and we'll add an even higher level abstraction, and we'll go to React. Okay. So we will do this just for academic purposes and tell you what's there. Not that you would actually do this, right? You'll maybe here and there you'll just play around with this, but not much. Other things you can turn on and off and display certain content, and maybe hide it. When you if you're clicking on an expand or collapse button, right? You can hide and show different content by changing the display style attribute. You can also represent dates by instantiating the date class. You say new date, and that gives you an object representation of, and then you can query it, month, day, year, seconds, and so on and so forth. You can read the month, read the full year, 2019 and whatnot. You can manipulate arrays, so an array of numbers here. And you can write to the content of the browser, right? Document.write, scores, and then write the array, or you can iterate over it like a regular for loop, as you would expect. Here we're just iterating over the array. One thing to point out here, notice that we are declaring the variable right inside of the for loop, like you can just in many other languages. You can declare it outside as well. Let's see, we're just calculating the average, and then we're just spitting out the average as you would expect, right? Things that you would expect in any programming language. Here we're demonstrating that we can dynamically generate HTML, and we're writing a UL, right? We're writing a UL, and as we iterate, we're writing dynamically LIs. See that? Right? We're building these strings and printing out this content, and then at the end we're closing the UL. Right, this is even though you could do this, this is oftentimes considered very bad practice. Trying to generate any other language from some other language, usually is very error prone. Okay, there's no no validation, no testing, very hard to test this, right? It's very, very easy to miss and forget, to close something. So you would never actually do something like this. Instead, you would use high-level libraries to handle these kinds of things, right? One of the approaches that Angular takes is that it splits up the concern. It splits up the two concerns. One is the data, right? That I need to iterate over the data, right? That's one concern. And the other concern is I need to render, right? And copy and paste this content over and over, right? And Angular makes a very distinct difference between these two, of data control and event mapping and behavior, and then the templating engine. So we'll look at that on how these can be split into two different worlds, right? And we can separate these concerns. Another thing that I want to point out here is notice this syntax here, var I in scores, where scores here is an array of integers, yes? Different scores you got in different quizzes. In other languages, the way you would interpret this is that I would be taking different values in the array of the scores, yes? Right, so scores I would be, 90, then 100, then 85, different scores you get, right? Not in JavaScript. The syntax is slightly different. This only is another way of quickly it's a shortcut of writing it just like an integer counter, right? So I is still just 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so careful there. Right? Don't treat it as Java or other languages where this indeed would be the instance of the elements in the array. Yes, right. It's still an index 0, 1, 2, 3. And notice that it's being used just as an index. So score sub 0, score sub 1, score sub 2, score sub 7. Yes. Yes, it's a for each. You can use a for each, and then yes, you get an instance of each one of the objects in the array. Yep, and we'll use plenty of that. Also there's the latest version ES6 will be using mostly this new syntax as we introduce React JS and so on and so forth. Yep. So here's just another example of generating HTML dynamically. Again, not that you would do this, right? But you can. Here we have a table string, and we're just concatenating to the string, a table. Then we concatenate a row. Inside of the row, we are concatenating a TD. Inside the TDs, we're displaying the scores, right? And we're adding the columns inside of the tables, and then we're displaying the entire table. So basically, we're building this long string, right? And then just spitting it out to the DOM for it to be rendered. Right. The thing to point out here is that there is first a portion where we are building the HTML, but as we are building it, it's still not displaying, right? Not until we actually spit it out to the DOM. Makes sense, yes? Only when we get to jQuery, this will be relevant, because it seems like you're manipulating the DOM, but not until you actually put it in the DOM does it render, right? So that'll be coming up in a minute. We can handle event handling as users click and drag and generate a stream of events by using these attributes that allow us to listen for incoming events. So here we're listening for the click event on this particular button, and if the button is clicked, then we invoke this function say hello over here. Yes, pretty simple. The only thing to point out here is notice what's inside of the quotes. Well, what's inside of the quotes is the actual name of the function and the parentheses. Yes, depending if we're using low-level JavaScript, whether we're using jQuery, whether we're using React, whether we're using Angular, you have to be careful what's inside of this quotes. It changes and it's different. It's interpreted differently by different frameworks. Yes. So just point out, you'll need to say, oh, well, what am I using now? I'm using Angular. Oh, it's this way. Yes.
So is JavaScript typically written in the same document as the HTML?
No. Yeah, we'll come to that. But yes, as our colleague here points out, writing JavaScript right on the HTML document is also considered a bad practice. Typically, you would write it in a separate file, and then you would import it using either script or inject it by other frameworks. What else here? We have here a function say hello that if we click on that button, it invokes the the function. I am pointing out here that typically the scripts are live on the head tag, right? Syntactically, that is the correct place to put it, right? That to put the all your scripts way at the top, and then they're referenced elsewhere on the page. And also, it's very common that right, you write all your entire code in a separate JavaScript like hello.js, and you know and not have the actual code live inside of the HTML. This allows you to split up the maintenance of these two documents by two different folks, right? Somebody who might very good at laying out the page and making it look pretty, as opposed to somebody who's responsible for the behaviors and manipulation of the data and accessing data services and whatnot. Yes, it allows you to break up those two concerns. It's a very common thing to do. Another thing that's also very common is that not to put these JavaScript files at the top where they actually belong. It's very common to instead put this JavaScript files way at the bottom, I mean, at the bottom of the body, right? Oftentimes these files are fairly large. Perhaps there are all sorts of libraries that you're downloading. You're downloading jQuery, you're downloading Angular, you're downloading React, you're downloading all these libraries, and the browser's behavior is to download them, read them, interpret them. You know, if they have anything executable, they will execute, right? So it might take the browser quite a bit of time to interpret these JavaScript files. Yes, and it hasn't even gotten to the body yet. It hasn't even gotten to the first image or text or anything like that. So it could slow down the page load, right? Just that, half a millisecond, half a second or second. And we folks are as we browse, we're very finicky, and if the page takes half a second too long, we navigate away. Yes, so it's very common to put this loading of these files way at the bottom, right? And then put most of your content, right, your marketing content, and grab somebody's attention right at the beginning. Push as much content to the user, get their attention, to click on something, and then leave the loading of the logic afterwards. Make sense? Right. So it's very, very common to put it at the bottom. Again, for performance reasons, even though syntactically is wrong. Syntactically, the script should be in the head, but the browsers don't care. They're okay with they understand what you mean, right? And they'll load it nevertheless. Some simple math here. Here we have just 2 plus 3, and we are going to dynamically update the span here, which is empty right now, right? What we're doing here is grabbing the result, and we're dynamically updating it to 2 plus 3 and becomes 5, right? We're going to be doing it quite a bit. Yes? I'm sorry? Right. Yeah, so right, so typically, right now we're working with static pages that they're standalone pages, and yes, each one of them should be syntactically correct with an HTML, a head, a body. As we go further in and we start using single page applications, there will be one single document that will have the head and the body, right? All the documents will be partial documents, right? Will be snippets of code, right? That will be dynamically injected into this one single typically the index page, right? Usually the index page will be a very trivial page, right, with a single HTML, head, body, and one single div, right, with a UI, with an ID, call it root or something, or main. And then all the other HTML documents will be snippets, right? They won't be full HTML documents, right? They will be injected. They will be templates. We're already calling them templates, yes? There will be template documents that will be dynamically injected into this one div, right? Using JavaScript. Yeah? So we're introducing that concept here, where we're dynamically manipulating the content, programmatically. Here, we're just injecting here the content that 2 plus 3 is 5. Here we have an input that has an initial value of 1, 2, 3, and we're just making sure that we can retrieve the initial value of input fields, and we can, maybe we can build an entire calculator, right, where we have 2 input fields where you can dynamically put in, manually put in values of a A and B. And as you click on an add button, if you click on the add button, we go in and we're going to call a function which is going to read from the input and then update the output in that span. Here we're reading from the document, right? Getting the input field, parsing it in int. That's also another point. Make sure that that you interpret the data at a high level, in the correct data type. When you read from input fields, those are by default they're strings. Yes. If you don't parse it, this plus here will be interpreted as a concatenation, string concatenation, right? So 2 plus 2 would be 22. Right? So be careful, right? Instead, make sure that you parse your things and you have the correct data type, and then this would be arithmetic addition, right? So just careful that you strongly type all your content. Here's just an introduction of objects. So in JavaScript, it's very easy to work with objects. It has the following syntax. It has just a curly bracket and then name value pairs, right? With where colon allows you to then declare where the name of the attribute or property and then the value of the property and then comma separated. Right? So we have here an object, a house object that has these 3 properties with these values: 3 rooms, 3 baths, 1,300 square feet. We refer to this notation as JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. And this notation we're going to be using all throughout the semester quite often. We can here's an example of using a JSON object to represent this dynamically on the screen. We have a UL which is empty, right? It has all these LIs but no actual values. We can read through the object, right, and read all the elements: the room LI, right, the room LI, the bath LI, the square feet LI. We can read each one of them and then manipulate their content dynamically and replace them with values of the rooms, the baths, and the square feet. Yes, right. We're going to be doing this quite a bit. Well, not using this syntax, but something similar. What React does and what Angular does is that it replaces this very low-level syntax, okay, with a very high-level infrastructure, okay, that allows you to replace and say rooms equals house.rooms, right, and magically, right, the infrastructure says, oh, you meant go get this element whose ID is rooms and replace its content with this value. Okay, so it will add a lot of plumbing so that you can easily just say rooms equals house.rooms, right? Or even you give UL a name for an object, right? And it magically you say UL ID house, and that magically allows you to map an object called house into the HTML. Yes, yes.
If there's multiple elements with the same ID, does it update all of them?
It would, but that would be syntactically incorrect to have an ID repeated in the same HTML. Yep. Use strict. So JavaScript, the base language JavaScript is very forgiving, right? It's not strongly typed, right? And sometimes when you compare values, it's very lenient. Okay, what allows you to compare, right? So for instance, the number 1, is it equal to the character 1, right? You'll say, yeah, they look the same. Yeah, they're the same, and for the most part, it's okay, right? And you can get away with it. But when you want to be when you want to be strict, and not allow JavaScript to do these this type of casting for you, right? It's oftentimes a good idea to turn on what is called use strict, and that means that the browser, when it runs, it sees this kind of syntax of comparing things that are not the same data type, it's going to complain. It's going to throw an exception. It says, "Oh, you're comparing things that are not the same type." Okay, so it's a good idea to always turn that on. Another concept which is becoming less and less relevant, but it's still you see this in the industry. In JavaScript, one of the big problems in JavaScript is in previous versions of JavaScript, which is still relevant, is that there is no there are no modules, right? There's no way to manage the namespace, right? If you declare a variable or function is depending on which scope do you declare it, you could very easily be overriding or some other function that is called the same name, or some variable that has the same name. Okay, and if it's just you, then that's okay. I mean, it's just your library, your code. Just be more careful. It becomes relevant when you start loading all sorts of third-party libraries. Yes, jQuery, React, and so on and so forth. They declare all sorts of functions, all sorts of globals, right? And you could inadvertently overwrite their definitions. Yes, so there in the language there was no mechanism to create modules or packages, right? Or like in Java, right? You can declare a package, right? And then whatever you declare in that package has that namespace. Yes. So in older versions of JavaScript, you don't have that. In newer ones, you do. In ES6, finally we get support of modules. But nevertheless, a way to get around this problem of namespaces was to use this syntax, right, referred to as the immediately invoked function expression, right? The only way to declare something that was opaque to everybody else, right, was to declare a variable inside of a function, right? If you declare a variable inside of a function, nobody can see that variable. Yes? Well, that's a module. That's what a module does, right? It allows you to declare variables within that namespace. But that was the only way to accomplish this in JavaScript. And so to accomplish this, we would declare a function and have all our code inside of that function, and then have an auto execute to start off the whatever logic we had in there. So notice we have a parenthesis at the end, and say, hey, that function on the left-hand side, call it, because I want to automatically execute it and declare everything inside of that function. So this is the old man's way of achieving modules, right? In pre-ES6 syntax. Right? You still see that. You still see it a lot while we do the transition between old JavaScript and new JavaScript. You still see this quite a bit in industry. All right, so let's declare a couple of things here. Let's look at an example.
Hi everyone, Jose here. Please remember to subscribe and like the video. And if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. Thank you.